you're interested kind of in my bread and butter, the flipped classroom concept. So we'll do a little bit of stuff around the flipped classroom concept. We'll do a little bit of stuff around other ways, I think, to become more effective teachers in a large classroom space, especially since a lot of you are involved in higher ed. And then we can talk about how some of that kind of translates into online education and kind of how to make those more effective and more interactive and just more engaging, because as we all know, there's a lot of attrition in online education. It's hard to really capture the engagement component because we're disconnected, because we're, as I mentioned last night, that Dr. Gordon calls it disincarnate communication, where you're not physically present and something is lost there. So how can we get as close to face as we can without actually being together? So good. Okay. So again, I don't have I'm not going to be just like clicking through the slides. I'm going to be moving around a lot and hopefully just answering lots of questions. So feel free to interrupt, throw something at me. Water bottles that are empty, I prefer being thrown versus full ones, but just let me know. Again, I want you to get as much out of this as you can today. And we have until 10:30, 10:15, 10. 10:15, okay, thank you. So I went a long last night. I don't want to do that again to you now. All right, so to get started, before we jump into this, and this is going to be very helpful, by the way, higher ed people. You guys use Blackboard here at Biola, is that right? Canvas. Oh, you're moving to Canvas. Oh, even better. I like Canvas a lot. People who are not at Biola, are you actively using an LMS at your institution or anything like that, or know what I'm talking about? E-College, okay. Anybody else using a learning management system? Not yet? Okay, good. We'll talk a little bit about learning management systems, but it sounds like a lot of you are heading the Canvas route. Okay, last night I talked about we need to start with good teaching practice first, then use technologies to support that. And I firmly believe that, because I've seen a lot of people just kind of jump into technology first and then they don't know how to use it. Actually, a lot of schools call me and they say, hey, can you come do a workshop and some training with our teachers? I'm like, sure, what do you want? Well, we bought a bunch of smart boards and now we don't know what to do with them. And like, just help us learn how to do something with it. I'm like, okay. Start by not buying a bunch of smart boards and hang them on the wall. But so you start with good teaching practice first, definitely. But there are some really cool things that are out there on the horizon that are allowing us to teach in ways that we've not been able to do that before. There's just really interesting stuff that's happening that are causing a lot of people to scratch their heads going, that's really cool, and that's really going to change the way we think about institutions, and that's going to have some really dramatic ramifications in terms of why we actually get together. And we discussed a little bit of those last night, but are there anything that you all can think of, like just technology that have just fundamentally changed the way we educate people? Anything at all? The internet. Okay, I would say that was the beginning of this massive just shift in constant access to all the information in the world. So information's cheap. It used to be a commodity. It's not the case anymore. So that's causing us to redefine what the functions of teachers can be. To be honest, I think it's driving us in a direction to what teachers used to be, and then we've drifted into this just idea of a content deliverer. And I think we're going back to in a good way, back to, I think historically what a lot of teachers have been prior to just information dissemination. Again, I'm not a historian. I don't know when that happened, but I have some ideas about it. Okay, good. So obviously the internet has fundamentally changed things. What are some other, maybe even more specific tools that have changed the way we can actually teach people?
Social media.
Okay, how so?
So I know a lot of teachers now are using things like Twitter to have students engage with one another and communicate outside the classroom.
Okay. Okay, so the idea that we can communicate with each other constantly, 24/7, on these little buzzy things that keep going off in our pockets, it doesn't restrict us to communication when we're physically present, when we're sitting in a room together. We can continue these conversations in ways that we haven't been able to do before. Good. Okay. So there's positives and there's some negatives to that, obviously, because people like me, when their phone buzzes, they have to check it. Okay. We have this pesky little thing in our brains called dopamine. And then we like the little reward that we get. We get the little dopamine burst and we check our phone. Oh, somebody liked my Facebook status. oh, somebody retweeted my tweet. And then we like that, and we keep checking, and we keep checking, and we keep checking, and our brains just kind of more, and we become little lab rats hitting the button for food. So that can be a problem, but it also expands our world where we can communicate. Like when I was a teacher, I had students who would get stuck at 10 o'clock at night on their chemistry homework, and they would text me, Mr. Sams, I'm stuck on number 5. What do I do? Well, it's 10:05, and I don't answer my texts after 10, so sorry, you have to wait in the morning. Or, it's 9:50, good thing you caught me, and I'd respond, things like that. Okay, what else? Either one. Go ahead.
VR and AR for hands-on training types of things.
Okay, flesh that out. How's that allow us? What's that allowing us to do now that we weren't able to do before?
For us, industrial types of training and things, it's very easy for them to see the images, to point to things, where they are, how you do things, play videos of instructional information at the moment when it's needed.
Okay, good.
I was going to go for video conferencing. Then now you can bring experts in the field into your classroom without them being physically present.
Okay, good. So video conferencing is really cool. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And to be honest, I think that's about as close as we can get to being face-to-face without actually being in the same room together. And I think it's an underutilized educational technology. The Google Plus Hangout, that alone, the fact that it's there, it's free, and anybody can just click a button and you're like in a room together with multiple people, and now they're adding all sorts of ridiculous features. You can call in now, you can all watch the same YouTube together. We can create these funny little artificial communities that are not face-to-face, they're not exactly the same, but I think it's about as close as we can get without actually being in the room together. So those are pretty phenomenal. You talk about bringing an expert into your room. My colleague, who I do a lot of this kind of work with and co-authored a book with, by the way, I have 3 if anybody's really, really interested. This is all I have left of my personal stash of books, so they're here. But so John, my co-author, he was working in a K-8 school up in the Chicago area. And he was assigned a group of 4th graders. He was the technology director, but he was a former science teacher. They said, can you do science stuff with 4th graders once a week? Those were his instructions. He said, sure, I guess. So he told his students, what do you want to learn? Let's learn it. So the 4th graders, they all came up with all sorts of problems and questions they wanted to solve. And the one question they wanted to answer was, what makes our brains make the decisions that it does to make us do things that we do? That's what the 4th graders wanted to know, right? So he said, okay, well, what do you think we should do? Well, I think we should ask a super smart scientist. That's what they concluded. So he just kept pressing, well, where do you find super smart scientists? I know, at a college. And so, well, what are some colleges that you know? They started making a list. And so they made a list of schools, and they finally concluded that there isn't like a super smart scientist department in most colleges. So they needed to figure out what department, narrowed it down to neurology, neurobiology, neuroscience, and found a professor at MIT who teaches neuroscience to join into the classroom. So they did a Google Plus Hangout, and they're like, oh, he won't want to talk to a bunch of 4th graders. And John said, doesn't hurt to ask, right? So they asked, and he said, sure, I'll be happy to do it. So he Skyped in for 30 minutes, and basically told the kids, we don't really know. That's the answer. But it was probably one of the coolest experiences ever, and they could just bring this guy in. Now, 20 years ago, you would have had to fly the guy out. It just wasn't going to happen. But these are just cool experiences that we can bring into our classrooms that were not possible before. Great. Any others that come to mind? Just things that are changing the way we actually engage in classroom time technologies.
I mean, another one that comes to mind is anything to do with gamification.
Okay.
So creating simulations so that students can practice skills either in a lab setting, in a classroom, or at home in their own time.
Mm-hmm. Good. You guys familiar with the concept of gamifying a classroom? To be honest, I'm kind of on the fence about it. I'm not sure it's a good idea. But since this came up, and since we're just kind of throwing things together today, I want to show you a video. This is my friend and colleague, Paul Anderson. Paul teaches biology up in Bozeman, Montana. He's got a really killer YouTube channel called Bozeman Science. He makes some fantastic science instructional videos. He did a TEDx Bozeman talk where he talks about his classroom being a video game. Now, it's not really a video game, but I'll let him explain it. So I'm going to take 10 minutes of our day, and I'm going to show this to you because I think it's really cool. So the idea of gamification is that you're going to take concepts of teaching and gaming, and you're going to smush them together. So let's listen to Paul.
Hello, my name is Mr. Anderson, and my classroom is a video game. I can't think of a better way to start a story than Alice falling down the rabbit hole, and she comes upon a bottle, and the bottle says simply, "Drink me." And so I'm a teacher, and so I wanted to try to recreate that. And so what I did is I left my computer in my class, and I had Angry Birds on it, and then I had a card next to it, and it simply said the word play. And then I walked away. But I wanted to see what would happen. And so I left the webcam on. And so I've got a little video of the kids as they come into class. And so would you like to see that? Yeah, as if you have an option. Yeah. I love how they took turns. And I love Jackson's eyes, if you watch it. Yes! Success! And so that look in his eyes, that look of learning and trying something new and failing and trying it again, is something that we aspire to see in the eyes of our kids. And we don't do that. A lot of the time it's glazed over look. And so I wanted to try to apply some of these dynamics into my classroom. So I grew up in the 1980s playing video games, and these video games taught me lessons that I think we could apply in schools today. The first thing I learned is that video games are fun, and school should be fun as well. Unfortunately, most kids wouldn't say their typical day is fun. However, there are elements of school that all students love. They love seeing their friends, and they love learning. Unfortunately, they spend most of the day just passively sitting listening to a teacher lecture. So I think school should be fun. Second thing I learned is that failure is okay. If it takes you 80 times to clear the third elevator stage in Donkey Kong, that's okay. Failure is simply part of the learning process. However, in schools, we tend to stigmatize failure. You don't get to take a quiz over and over and over again until you finally pass it. In fact, failure of individuals, and right now, failure of schools, is highly stigmatized. And so I think we need to send a message that failure is okay. The third thing I learned is the importance of leveling. This could be applied in schools in two ways. When a teacher decides to move at a specific pace, that's okay for some of the students in their class, but some of the students are automatically going to be bored, and some of the students are quickly going to be confused. And so I think that students should be able to move on their own pace through a mastery system where they master a level and then they can move on to the next one. They also should be able to level up, becoming more powerful as they learn new material in the class. I also think that we give the wrong lecture at the beginning of the year. And I used to give this lecture at the beginning of the year. I would say, you all have an A. From this point forward, you will fall precipitously until you eventually land at your final grade. No game would ever be designed this way. And so, one of the great things about being a teacher is that you get summer break. And summer break is great because you get a break from school, but you also can reinvent your class, make it something that has never been before. And so, if you try to do that during the year, if you try to make radical changes, the kids will just simply be confused. But if you change it during the summer, you can make huge, sweeping changes in your class, and the kids will never know what hit them. And so this was my dream. I wanted to reinvent my class as a video game. But I didn't want the kids to just sit in front and watch a video game like Oregon Trail or Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. I wanted to take the most compelling elements of gaming and then apply it in the classroom. This took a lot of work. And so I had to create a class. It's called Biohazard 5. It's got a narrator, it's got a narrative. All the kids come together there. I've created about 100 video podcasts that take them through the lecture, and so when they get that point, they can kind of learn. I have all these special activities, so in class, the kids can apply the material that we're learning in the real world. I have a bunch of inquiry labs. This one right here is a photosynthesis lab. You can see my students very riveted. They're studying photosynthesis right on using little chads that we cut out of a leaf. I've developed hundreds of questions, and I have a mastery system where the students can take quizzes over and over and over again until they finally get it. I have a leveling system, so they start with 0 experience points at the beginning of the year. I borrowed this from Lee Sheldon at University of Indiana. So basically they come in on day 1. I invented the bottom level as primordial soup because I teach biology. And so they gain experience points and they can move their way up to like Dumbo Octopus and Mountain Gorilla and maybe Grand Master at the end. I also have a leaderboard, so they play with an avatar and they can see how they're doing in the class, how they're doing against everybody else. This is the most popular resource in the class. Kids are constantly logging in to see how they stack up. I also got to pilot a classroom set of iPads, and so kids had an internet-connected device at all times. And so finally, the summer was over, and I stood in front of the class, like this apparently, and I said, hello, my name is Mr. Anderson, and my class is a video game. So what I want you to do is grab an iPad. I want you to log into Biohazard 5. I want you to watch a video. I want you to do some reading. I want you to take a quiz, and then I want you to head off into the class. Now, if I would have done this with my students' parents, it would have been the most frustrating day of my life. But the kids grew up with this technology, and the technology today simply works. And so they were headed off on their own. And so my class is a learning classroom. If you were to come in, you would find kids reading, watching videos, applying, doing special activities, trying to solve challenges, working together or working alone. And so it's a really neat, I had a teacher come and we were just talking about halfway through the class and he said, what you've created is like a shop class. Because he was a shop teacher at once and he said, so as a shop teacher, you teach them some skills and then the kids can apply that. And so it's like that. I would love to keep telling you about how great it is, how the test scores seem to be going up, and how the kids are learning how to learn independently. But I am a science teacher, and that's not what gets us excited. In science, what gets us excited is discovering something new. And so I want to talk about 3 ways that I failed. Number 1, a conventional classroom is like a school bus, where all the students log in, they just get on, and the teacher is like the bus driver, and it drives from point A to point B, and you can make sure that all the students get there. And so what I had done is I had given each of them a brand new car, keys, and I said, drive. And so some of them stalled out, and some of them raced ahead, and some of them drove right into a wall. And so I need to give them more scaffolding next year. The next thing I learned is the importance of reading. Kids struggled with reading when you make your class independent. And I should have seen this coming because it's the biggest indicator of success. And I think the reason I didn't see it coming is that I never stopped talking. Because that's what good teachers do. We read the book, and then we come up with really good examples, and then we present it in a dynamic way, and the kids can just sit there, and then they can learn it. Why would they want to read the book? We read it for them. And so when I force them to read the book, a lot of them struggle, and we've had to work with that. The last thing I learned is that we are not Vulcans. In the most recent Star Trek movie, young Spock sits in a little module, and he's surrounded by computer screens, and the computer keeps throwing questions at him in philosophy and relativity, and that's his school day. He just sits in a little module like that. And so a lot of people think that they can change education by somehow using videos or automating the learning process. That sucks. Who would want to be in a school like that? Kids are coming to school to be social. And so I had to add elements of social learning in my class to make it more compelling. And so this is a TED Talk. And so all good TED Talks always end with a call to action. And so what can you do? And so I think schools need to move from a passive teacher-centered learning environment to an active student-centered learning environment. And that's what I did. I was off to the side now. I was a mentor in the class. So how do we do that? Well, if you're a student, You give feedback to your teachers. Everything I do in my class is a result is a result of feedback I've gotten from my students. And what do you do if you're a parent? You write an email if you want your schools to change. The only emails I get from parents are complaining about their student's grade. I never get, and my kid has an A in your class, but I have problems with the philosophy of your class. That doesn't happen. And so the message you're sending teachers is that the grade is the only thing that's important. But maybe you're not a parent, and maybe you're not a student, but you are a human. And so what's the lesson? What's in the bottle? What's in there? It's your passion. It's the one thing that you want to do. Can you figure out what my passion is? I love my family, and I love teaching. And if you can drink that bottle, also remembering to fail, learn, and then repeat the process over again, then I think you'll have a life worth living. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for humoring me and listening to what Paul had to say, but it was a nice transition into this other question that I wanted to ask you guys. So I've talked extensively to Paul about this idea of gamification and some of the implications and ramifications that it has on education. So it's led to a lot of conversation. Obviously, he and I are kind of kindred spirits. If you heard me talking last night, there's a lot of overlap with what Paul has talked about, and we just feed off each other. I mean, online and face-to-face, we bump into each other a lot. But we've kind of diverged a little bit in the way we think about education. So he talked a bit about standardization. He talked a little bit about automation. And then also as a component of his game-based classroom, of his gamified classroom, badging, points, leveling up, leaderboards, things like that. So I want to talk about that component of gamification, that component of what a lot of educational technologies are doing right now. Data collection, using a learning management system to complete certain tasks that then unlock other tasks. So what do you think? Standardization, automation, is this helpful? Is it harmful? What do you think about points? What do you think about leaderboards and the idea of gamification? Let's chat about this for a while. I'm curious. You're grinning, and you like the idea of gamification. So let's.
I like the idea of it. I also am very concerned by it.
Okay.
Like, I think there's huge ethical implications for gamification as well. So what I like about it is the opportunity for students to have lots and lots of practice, especially at lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Like if you want to train over and over again, like knowledge acquisition, remembering, those kinds of things, I think that's really helpful. Where I'm troubled is in the area, especially of training issues of soft skills, for example, because what I don't want to do is further this kind of disembodied, disincarnate, non-social type interaction, because ultimately things like soft skills are meant for human interaction. So to replace that with an automaton, that's not the point. I also am not a fan of the leaderboard system at all, because I want to encourage collaboration in my classroom rather than competition. And to the extent that the leaderboard encourages student-to-student competition with each other, and we already have that in our classrooms anyways, especially if you grade on a curve, but then to explicitly encourage that kind of thing, I think is really problematic.
Okay. What are some other thoughts about leaderboard and points and competition? Any other positions on that or ideas?
I'm assuming that the students don't know each other's names in
Right.
the little avatar thing, but
Correct.
they still know there's somebody around them. So I agree, though. I think that can be problematic. And I guess I haven't ever really thought about it or discussed it till now, but what's coming to my mind is where does it lead and where does it end, and what kind of employees are they? So I want to ponder that some more.
Okay. Any other thoughts on just game-based learning or leaderboards or?
I think it can be a great motivator for students. Like that's their world. They go out of school and go play video games all the time, so it's something that connects with them. And I think in a video game setting, it's normal to ask, hey, what's this answer in 4 pictures, 1 word, or how do I beat this level and whatever. And so I think it can promote more interactions and less intimidating. Hey, I have a question about this. I don't understand the science topic, but I can ask a question about a game I'm doing or something else. So I think it can create a less threatening. So I think there's definitely problems with it and competition that can go out of hand, but I think there can be benefits too for students.
Okay. All right.
It's not an all or nothing thing, though.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's motivating for them.
What is motivating for them?
The leaderboard gamification thing.
Okay.
It could be dismotivating too, I think, because for some students who aren't as good, if they see that they're at the lower level, then they're like, well, I'm not gonna get to the top, so what's the point of even trying? And so then from that point, it's good for certain students who excel in that arena, but then the students who don't, then it's like, well, oh well, I guess I'm gonna give up at this point. So I think it's for different students.
If you went back 50 years, it's the same concept of a teacher putting a chart on the board, a fourth grade teacher, and you're putting stars on the times table that the kids learn. So you've got winners and losers.
Not 50 years. I did that in 1986 in my classroom as well.
Yeah, that whole concept of cooperation versus competition.
Yeah.
If you find your identity in that you're better than someone else, are we actually training our students to find their identity in a place that we don't, that is not healthy from a spiritual point of view? Yet games are fun.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there needs to be, in utilizing that, maybe there needs to be nuances to it. Because I think there's certain ages and generations that really, and certain types of personalities that really enjoy competition and find it motivating, and others that find it overwhelming because that's not the way they learn.
Mm-hmm.
And instead the message is I'm a failure or I don't measure up.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see people's personalities come out in questions like this because, so I am not competitive by nature. I just simply, I don't care. I am not motivated by points. My students would always ask, Mr. Sams, how many points is this worth? 1 million? How many do you want? It doesn't matter. I'll just make a multiplier to make it work the same way in the grade book or whatever. So that just doesn't do anything for me. Whereas some students, they're just driven by points. They're driven by competition. My own conclusion, educationally speaking, is I don't think education should ever be competitive, nor should it ever be punitive. That it should always be a positive thing that enriches the whole person. So my fear with standardization and automation, having things like leaderboards and point acquisition, is that the acquisition of points becomes the motivating factor, and learning takes a second seat to that. And I experienced that as a student growing up in a point-driven, grade-driven learning environment, and I experienced that as a teacher teaching in a point-driven learning environment where students, all they cared about was how many points is it worth, what is the bottom line effect on my grade? And learning didn't happen. I was a really, really, really good student in high school, K through 12, did exactly what my teachers told me to do, performed really, really well, got mostly A's, and I don't think I learned a thing during the process. But I was really good at playing the game of school. So we can gamify our classrooms, but school is already a game. It really is. I mean, it has rules, and if you play by the rules, you win. And if you don't play by the rules, you don't win. So I was telling you the story of Alyssa last night, how she just rejected the game, flat out right. So I finally threw out the rules and said, okay, here's what I need you to learn, go. And she did, and is now becoming a chemical engineer, and just knocked my socks off. I mean, just unbelievable what she was able to produce in my class when I didn't say, do this, do this, do this, get all the points, and then you can have an A. It was, go learn some chemistry, and here's some structure to help you go, and I'm here to support you. And she came alive. So I just fear that that a lot of the educational technology systems that we have out there are forcing education into point acquisition, competition, and this idea of leaderboards, and we're automating the process so much where it's complete this task, then move to the next, complete this task, then move to the next, complete this task, and move to the next. And that's fine if we're going to go back 100 years, and we're going to be training people for industrial revolution, for factory jobs, where they're going to do as they're told, and they're going to do things always sequentially. But most of where industry is heading, a lot of where our culture as a whole is heading, is more into the creative side of things, more of the divergent thinking, and we're not just slogging through linear processes anymore. It's important to be able to do that. We need engineers to develop those kind of systems, and some people are just wired that way. But forcing everybody into that kind of model kind of scares me. So that's my fear with some of the gamification. It's kind of one of my concerns with Khan Academy, that whole model of, this is what you haven't done yet. You need to get in and do that, and then you can move on to the next. Now, I adopted a mastery-based system like Paul Anderson was talking about. You demonstrate your understanding, and then you can move on. After doing that for about a year and a half, I saw the looks on my students' face when they took a quiz 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times and still didn't pass it. And that was the threshold. You have to pass the quiz before you can move on to the next thing. You have to level up before you can continue. Some kids are like, I've done this same thing 6 times. It's obviously not working for me. Help me, please. And that's really what drove me to Universal Design for Learning, what I talked about last night, giving students opportunities to learn in different ways and demonstrate their understanding in different ways as well. And that component, I felt that I was mechanizing my classroom with this mastery-based system, and embracing these ideas of universal design is what really brought some humanity back into it. And I think really fixed my problem of just demoralizing and destroying my students. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of behaviorism and this idea of cognition and the idea of like programming our brains essentially. So our brains are weird things, and we are weird creatures. So we are unique in creation. We are different than the animal world, but we still have a lot of overlap. I mean, biochemically, we operate pretty much the same as other animals. There are portions of our brain that function similarly to other animals, but we're obviously unique creations. There's components of us that are obviously different. We've been made in the image of God, whereas my cat has not. These are the things that set us apart. But so we can program our brains. We can force ourselves to do things and to behave like creatures. But I think teaching students and using technologies to mechanize things and to actually train students and essentially program their brains to operate in particular ways is a problem. I think it robs us of some of our humanity and robs us of some of this idea of being made in the image of God. And we need to be very, very careful with that. The idea of behaviorism in general is rooted in philosophical naturalism, that we are just animals, and that since we are just animals, we can be programmed like that. And just because we can be programmed like that doesn't mean we should be programmed like that, because there are obviously other aspects of our humanity that we need to consider in teaching the whole person. So I'm just going to caution us with anything we use in educational technology not to get it too mechanized. So anyhow, I'm glad we watched Paul. I hope that was a worthy 10 minutes of your time. But it does drive us to a lot of new conversations. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about are some components of, some technological components that I think are essential for most classrooms. And then my whole gig is obviously this whole flipped classroom concept. And these, I think, are some essential elements in a flipped classroom. So first and foremost, if you are not using a course management system or a learning management system, please start now. I think they are unbelievably helpful. Your students, if they just have one place where they can always go, it's great to just have access to content, access to stuff for the class, and it's one-stop shopping. You don't have to maintain your own website, you don't have to do any of that stuff, you just dump it into the learning management system. There's a million of them out there. It sounds like most people here are using Canvas. To the other C. Sorry, different worlds. And then eCollege. Now there's a million of them out there. Find one and use it. I mean, we could talk for hours on learning management systems. So pick one and use it well. I do want to talk a little bit about content creation software, and what I mean by that is video producing software that individual teachers can use. So in a room where you don't have to have lecture capture systems set up, you don't have to have automated systems, the stuff you can do on your laptop at home. Some for free, some for some paid resources. We'll talk a little bit about some things we can do in class and some technologies we can do there. We're going to go through this, use that Verso app, go through a process called peer instruction. It's a process that's developed by Dr. Eric Mazur out of Harvard. He's a physics professor there. Doesn't do any lecture in a 600-person lecture hall. but still teaches students in a really large math class. So I think this might be very helpful for you. And then assessment. If we have time, we can talk about kind of the automation of assessment and how that can be helpful. And how, we've talked about some of the dangers of that as well. Okay. I do want to give you some resources here real quick as well. Friend and colleague of mine, his name's Dan Spencer. He's the guy that actually made the origami video last night. He's compiled a massive document of resources and hardware and software that help support a flipped classroom. So you can find it there, bit.ly/dvsflip. You know what's that? I need to tell you a funny story about Dan. We were traveling together in Germany a couple years ago, doing a workshop at the University of Marburg. And just kind of, we'd known each other for, I don't know, a while through online interactions. We were getting to know each other. Come to find out, he used to live in this area and was one of the LDS missionaries when I was a student here who was asked not to come back onto campus. So we found that out after the fact of like, wait a minute, that was you? That was fun. So anyhow, long story, but just an interesting connection that we had, and we've been great friends ever since. But anyhow, he's compiled a great list of resources. I can't go through it in just an hour because it's massive, but we will refer to it a little bit later to talk about some technological components. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of these tools and what they can and can't do. So tools for video creation and content creation. I'll demo a couple of these. If you have an iPad, there's something out there called Doceri and another one called Explain Everything. These are two great iPad apps. They can't do everything, but they're really, really helpful. So Doceri, it allows you to kind of mark up and annotate some things. You can actually drive your computer with it as well if you pay some money for some software on your machine. Explain Everything is just a whiteboarding app, but you can record anything that's on either of those. So you just do a quick little sketch, make a recording, and upload it, and you've got just an instructional tool that you can go through. If you're doing something on your computer, the two that I'm going to have us look at today are Screencast-O-Matic and Camtasia. Screencast-O-Matic is free and it's web-based. It'll record anything on your screen, as well as your audio, as well as whatever's on your webcam. Package it together. You can do minimal editing. You can do the pay version to do a little bit more editing, and then one click upload to YouTube, or download the video file and then you stick that on your learning management system. Okay, Camtasia Studio has some more robust editing features. This is what I've used to make all of my content. I think it's a really great tool. Don't pay retail. Make sure you call for education pricing if you do that. And this is a screencasting program. It allows you to record what's on your screen, and your audio and your webcam, and lots of editing features. So I'll demo those in just a minute, but what I want you to do is I want to just show you some content that some teachers that I've worked with have made. So this will be kindergarten through university and all sorts of different subject areas. This is some of the stuff that's coming out. And you're going to notice a few things in these videos, good, bad, and some things that you might want to emulate and some things that you might want to avoid. Plus, there's some really fun 80s music. But what I want you to do is to make note of a couple of things here. One is, I want you to use video to get away from information dissemination as your primary means of classroom time. Okay? But we still need to teach students some content so that we can facilitate better conversations during class time. So what separates these videos from simply a recorded lecture? That's what I want you to make a mental note of. Okay, how are these different than just a recorded lecture? Second is, what are some components that you find helpful? And what are some components of them that you find distracting? Okay, so again, these are all teacher created or professor created. Think about that. Let's take a look at this. How is it different than a recorded lecture? And what are some good and bad components of them? Maybe. Why aren't you playing? There we go.
While using his superpowers, superhero A will say his name, put up his big muscle arms and say A.
distance from 0 to 1 is the same as the distance from 1 to 2. Likewise, it's the same as the distance from 2 to 3.
Now in those phrases, what we can do is simply say me gusta and then attach it to the end. So an example, I can say, taking from that list, me gusta tocar la guitarra, me gusta cantar.
Well, see, you guys have developed this massive bomb that you used on Japan after World War II. And we wanted to be big and bad as well and powerful. So we started to try to create nuclear weapons to rival yours.
And of course we have command economies, and other words for those. Planned, centrally planned, command and control, socially.
Welcome class. Today I will be sharing with you how to make a fruit smoothie. These things are scrumdiddlyumptious, tasty goodies.
Because, as you can see, it's fizzing right here. It's producing a gas. It's bubbling over.
Tendons, as you see here, connect muscles to bones. Here you see the gastrocnemius, the calf muscle, being connected to the calcaneus.
Another thing I want to talk about is cells are not boring. When I grew up, I had this idea that a cell was like a bag of jelly and you had stuff like a nucleus inside it and it would essentially float around.
Here in Woodland Park, we're at a higher altitude, so the temperature is actually boiling at 92 degrees Celsius.
A biography is a story, a non-fiction story, written about someone by someone else. And I have an example here. It is my Lady Gaga biography.
I'll say, hey, come on. And that gives us a molar mass of 44 grams.
Those potatoes in there. Now compared to what we saw, it's totally full. Foil's a lot of action.
Here in the middle, we have two friendly sumo wrestlers who are eating the sushi roll. Okay, the one on the left is eating 3/4 of the sushi roll.
I'm excited. You're excited. I know you guys just want to get through algebra, and so you want to get through it, and I'm going to get to it. We're going to talk about radicals and square roots.
Okay, so how were most of those different than simply a recorded lecture, like sticking a camera in the back of the classroom?
The examples always work.
What do you mean?
I mean, when you're doing some chemistry thing,
Oh.
it always works.
Yeah.
Because if it didn't, you would read it.
You could reshoot it. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of those, it took 3 or 4 takes to get the thing to do right. Yeah, you're right. When I was a teacher, I had 6 periods a day that I taught, and first period, inevitably, nothing worked correctly. So my first period class, the demos never worked, but they would finally fix it by second or third period. Okay, good. What else? Different than recorded lecture?
Graphics, a lot of graphics.
Okay, so multimedia, we're incorporating audio and video and pop-ups and all that sorts of stuff. You guys remember VH1 pop-up video back in the 90s? Those little text boxes would pop up and tell you a little factoid about the artist. You can throw things like that in there. Good, what else?
Students could pause.
Okay, so they have control of the rate of the intake. Good, what else?
You weren't taking rabbit trails that other students were diverting the conversation.
Yeah, there's some really good students that know the buttons to push with different professors, right? If you just say this one word, boom, they're off for 30 minutes and you don't have to learn because they're going to tell you stories about whatever. Okay, what else?
You can see the professor's face while the graphics are being annotated at the same time, rather than the presentation station.
Okay.
Where you're drawing on the board, you can't see, and you're not talking.
Okay, good. So you can, there's facial recognition while the things are being annotated. Good. Okay. Now, some of those were good, some of those were not good. I intentionally have some really bad ones in there just to get our brains thinking about some quality points of these things. Obviously, these are not heavily produced. These are not high production value videos. So this is teacher created stuff that they're making quick and dirty for their students. This is not a polished professional level product. There's different ideas about that. Some want it to be perfect. I usually need mine, I usually ask myself, okay, do I need it perfect or do I need it on Tuesday? And Tuesday inevitably went. So mine were always fairly rough. So what were some components of some of those that you found helpful, and what were some things that you thought might be a little distracting and there was plenty of room for improvement?
I thought it was distracting to have the tiny little talking head in the corner, and
Okay.
then
adjust like the presentation or the visual aid and
Okay.
back and forth.
Good. So there's a divergence of opinion on that. And this is actually something I want to research at some point. Is it beneficial to have someone's face on there? The feedback I got from my students is we like it. We want the face there because you're not just a disembodied voice. You're my teacher. So it's one more step toward being closer to being face-to-face with one another. Other teachers like, I don't want my face on there. I know a teacher that has like the best picture that she ever took of herself, and she just puts the picture down there. And so instead of her mouth moving, so she's like, that's as good as I'm ever going to look, so that's the one I'm going to use. But others, I had an opportunity to chat with Sal Khan from Khan Academy about this. I said, you don't put your webcam on, I do. Why do we disagree on that? He said, different audiences. I make mine for my students. He's kind of making his videos for the world. He thinks it would be distracting to have his face there. He wants the content to stand alone. I want the connection with my students because these were for my students. So there's difference of opinion. You can toggle it. Most of these software, you can turn it on, turn it off, and make it big and make it small and move it around and all this stuff. So there's options there as well. Good. Other things, good, bad, or otherwise?
The one guy who was doing the smoothie
Mm-hmm.
was cut off.
Yes. Yeah.
Defeating the purpose of actually having him in the
Exactly, and he's got really cool dreadlocks too. Like you want to see those, but he's clipped from here up. Good. So again, that was the first one he'd ever made. So he didn't know what he was doing. So just some basic things about making sure you got yourself framed in there correctly. Yeah.
It was interesting with they were talking and then words would come on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
To be listening and then reading is a little confusing at times.
Okay. Good. So.
There's a distance because where their head was talking and then the little banner at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. So those are things that you would want to talk to like video production people about. Where even on the screen would you want to put something like that, and when? So I like those text boxes because they kind of reinforce what I have just said. But yeah, you're exactly right. Where you put it and when you put it up there and how long you have it up there it's an important consideration, and it takes some time and some experimentation and some research to figure out optimization of that. Good.
When he says like "me gusta" and then it, like right when he's saying it, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's great because then you can like read it and see it at the same time.
Okay. Good.
Two things I really liked are, one, the ability to just zoom in on details. So
Mm-hmm.
if something's writing on the board, something, then you can zoom in and read it rather than like, what does that say?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I liked is when they were doing science experiments, and then you'd have those annotated text boxes say like, and this is what's going on, so you get that extra level of detail that is helping you process the experience.
Okay. Good.
I was just gonna talk about the video production value. Immediately I go to the sound.
Mm-hmm.
The sound is more important in these things, and teachers don't always get that.
Best component of a good video is good audio. If you're going to spend $100, invest it in audio equipment rather than video. Your webcam is going to be fine, but the built-in mic probably isn't. Okay. So Paul Anderson, did you see him come back up again in his biology video? His stuff is really, really good. Like, and I called him one day. I said, Paul, I'm in a workshop. I was like in the middle of a workshop. I picked up my phone. Paul, I need to know some details. We've noticed that your stuff is really good. You know, you're filling the frame nicely. You know, you sound good. How much money did you spend? He said about $60. He said he's using the built-in webcam on his computer. He bought a little $60 USB kind of clip-on microphone to enhance that. And he said, I sit in a room with good light that's quiet, no distractions, and I have a little sheet that I put behind me. That's it. So he was just very conscious about some of these things that could be distracting. Like the one that was in there, actually you couldn't see the webcam because we had zoomed in on it in a different spot. John and I were doing one of these together. You heard there's like a lot of classroom noise in the background. We made it at lunch one day and the door was open. We're like, what are we thinking? That was just dumb. We should have just thought about, let's close the door and then it's going to be even better. There's people moving around behind us, and just little details like that can help a lot. Good. What else?
And I just want to jump onto that. I think it's so important having, you know, even doing little things to make your production value that much better, because students, they've consumed so much media at this point, this new generation.
Mm-hmm.
They know, I mean, right away, and it sets off those triggers. If they see that it's shoddy or something,
Yeah.
they instantly kind of turn off to it.
The opposite of a good video is an off video. People won't watch something that's bad. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be well put together. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Is that a point on one watching the student-produced videos?
Okay.
Excuses that.
A little bit. Yep.
Because they've got the interest because it's their level,
Mm-hmm.
their people, so they're not as worried about the technology or quality of production.
Okay. Good. Anything else? Good, bad, or otherwise? Any other comments on those?
The music being like the opacity and being
Uh-huh.
around it. That, I mean, obviously, I'm sure he was trying to make a motivating part of it, but I mean, to try to learn with, trying to mix those two together just wasn't.
It's too much. Information overload, signal to noise ratio, people. Yeah, absolutely. You can go way overboard. So I kind of limit myself. If I have a 10-minute video, I give myself 30 minutes to work on it. 10 minutes to make the recording and 20 minutes to edit, and I shut myself off because I've got better things to do than monkey around editing video all day long. Okay? Some people, that's their job, and it needs to be perfect, and they do a really good job of it. That's not me. I'm a teacher. This is a teaching tool that I'm using for my students. Good. Okay. Let's move on now, since we're running short on time. I get excited and I keep going at things. I never get through what I need to get through. So a lot of you are in higher ed and probably teach in classrooms like this one in the picture, or like this one, or the one downstairs. And like, how do I get an interactive? How do I get students to interact? How can I do something other than lecture in a room that's designed for lecture? So we're going to go through a process called peer instruction, developed by Dr. Eric Mazur out of Harvard that I mentioned. And I'll give you some resources for this in a minute. We're going to do this using the Verso app, but don't log into Verso. Don't watch the video in Verso. We're going to do some pretending. That way we just watch it all together. Okay. So this video is about gravity. Okay, so we're going to do some learning about gravity. So we're going to pretend here for a minute that you are all college students. You are all in your dorm room with your laptop, and this is the night before class. Okay, so you've logged into Verso because your professor said, okay, this is what we're going to use to deliver this. And in there's a new lesson and there's a video that you need to watch about gravity. Okay, now, interesting thing about video and students is most students don't know how to watch a video. They don't know how to watch it effectively. I mean, if you're watching Spider-Man or you're watching a lesson on a cell, you're going to view those differently. So I actually spend a significant amount of time in my own classrooms teaching my students how to effectively view video. Put on headphones. It blocks out the world around you. Turn off Facebook for a few minutes. Maybe take some notes while you're doing it. I actually had some guided notes, like fill in the blank type of stuff, or sometimes just a rough outline that they could kind of flesh out. Some students liked that structure to help them take them through it. 16-year-olds often don't know how to take notes effectively. It's one thing I had to learn when I got here as a student. Like, oh wow, I don't know how to take notes and I don't know how to study. I need to learn fast. So train them. They need to learn. So you're going to watch this video on gravity. Okay, now a couple things I want you to think about is make note of anything that you think might be relevant, and then we're going to all answer a question about gravity in Verso when we're done. So if you want to, you can look at the question that you're about to answer so you know kind of what I'm going to be asking. So if you want to log back into Verso, do that. If you didn't create a Verso account, that's okay. We're going to do this in a low-tech way here after when we're done. Okay, so let's watch the video together about gravity. This is actually a video that was done by TED Ed. They have taken teacher lessons and they have had teachers record the audio, and then they've hired professional animators to animate them. So they're a lot of fun. So this one's done by a colleague of mine, and I'll stop talking. Here we go.
I'll bet most of you think it's what goes up must come down. Is that right? Well, sort of, but not really. Technically, the law of gravity is an equation. It is F equals G times M1 times M2 divided by R squared, where G is the universal gravitational constant, M1 and M2 are the masses of the two objects, and R is the distance between them squared. That was easy, right? Probably not. But what does this actually mean? Well, it means that, well, everything is attracted to everything else. And what I mean by that is that if you have two objects, any two objects, they are attracted to each other. Okay, let's try and wrap our minds around this. What happens when you drop a rock off a cliff? It falls to the earth, right? Well, yes, but something else happens. You see, the law of gravity says that both objects, the rock and the earth, are attracted to each other. This means that the rock falls towards the earth, and the earth falls towards the rock. Oh, wait a second. You mean to tell me that if the earth falls up to meet the rock? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And the reason you don't see the Earth fall to meet the rock is because the objects move towards each other proportionate to their respective masses. The Earth is much, much, much more massive than the rock, so it moves a very, very small distance. And the rock is much less massive, so it moves farther with respect to the Earth. Maybe a better way to understand gravity is to take two teenagers in spacesuits and place them far out in space, away from all the planets and the stars. Turns out they will be attracted to each other. I'm not talking about that kind of attraction. See, they have mass, and since they have mass, they will move towards each other. They are attracted to each other. Maybe one more thing might help. Have you ever played with two magnets? You know the magnets with the north and the south poles? When you take the magnets and put them closer to each other, they move together. They are attracted to each other. And the closer they are, the stronger the attraction. Think of the mass of the object like the strength of a magnet, and the distance between the objects like the distance between the two magnets. Now understand, I'm not saying that gravity and magnetism are the same, they just behave in a similar way. Let's think of one other thing. Astronauts. You know, astronauts, they weigh less on the moon than on the Earth. Why is that? Well, you see, the moon is less massive than the Earth. Therefore, it has a smaller gravitational pull on the astronaut. It's like the moon is a weaker magnet. They aren't as attracted to each other. Distance also plays a role. Think back to playing with a magnet. The pull of the magnets towards each other are stronger when they are closer together. The same is true of gravity. For example, the sun is the most massive object near the Earth. It dictates most of the gravitational forces in our solar system. It is very, very massive. But it is relatively far away, so even though the sun is a much stronger magnet, so to speak, it is a long ways away. Therefore, the attraction isn't as strong. So let's look back at that law of gravity, the equation, F equals G times M1, M2 divided by R squared. You see, the force of gravity is equal to a number. That's that universal gravitational constant, G, times the mass of object 1 times the mass of object 2. Think of M1 being the mass of the sun, and M2 being the mass of the Earth. And then we divide by the distance between them squared. This determines the force of attraction between the sun and the Earth. You could just as easily plug in your mass and the Earth's mass and the distance between you and the center of the Earth, and find out how much you are attracted to the Earth and the Earth attracted to you. So what's gravity? Everything is attracted to everything else. Everything. Oh, one last thing, just to make you wonder. What causes gravity? Why are two objects with mass attracted to each other? Well, the answer is, we don't know. The cause of gravity remains a mystery to scientists. We don't really know conclusively what causes gravity. It is one of the great mysteries of science.
All right, college students, you're still in your dorm room. You just watched the assigned video, and you're going to log into Verso. So hopefully you were able to create an account and to get in there. If you didn't, don't worry. It's not the end of the world. So there's one question you need to respond to in the Verso app. Again, you're still at home in your dorm room, and I need you to respond. This is the question, just in case you're not logged in there. But I'd like you to log in and respond to the question, and you're going to have to type more than just the letter. So you have to actually, I think 5-character limit is what you need to type. So if the moon was twice the distance from the Earth as it is today, how much would the gravity vary? A, it would not be any different. B, it would be twice as weak. C, it would be 4 times as weak. D, it would be less, but you can't determine how much less. E, it would be higher. Or F, none of the above. So go ahead and respond in Verso. Post your answer. I'm going to monitor your progress. So this is what I'm going to be doing before I get to class the next morning, is checking to see who posted what. So go ahead and post your response when you have an idea. And if you have no clue, just pick one. Okay. Oop, we have one response. Uh-oh, my app just froze.
question ambiguous?
A little bit.
Do you mean gravity, quad gravity, or do you mean the gravitational force between them?
F, force of gravity per the equation.
Okay.
Yes, but you're right, it is worded poorly.
Because I assume gravity itself wouldn't vary.
The universal gravitational constant would not change, but the force of attraction between the two will.
So I lived in confusion. I was a weird student in school.
That is quite all right.
And it could be read to mean, does the gravity on the moon, if you're standing on the moon moves far away, do you still weigh the same?
It could be read. Yeah, you're right. It is an ambiguously worded question. And actually, the next one we're going to do is even worse, and I'm going to tell you why it's worse. This one is not intentionally ambiguous. You're just a lot smarter than I am. Solve for F. Basically, is what I'm asking you to do. But you're right. It is worded poorly. I will have to fix that. Thank you. Okay. Looks like most of you have responded, and so I'm just perusing through your responses. Okay, so I've got a pretty good idea of where the classroom's at. So as a teacher, I'm collecting data, and I already know information about where my students' kind of understanding of the class is, except for the challenging of the way my question has been worded. But that probably would have come through me in a private email or text message. Dude, Sams, you got to get your act together because, yeah, you're obviously not a language person. You're obviously a science nerd who deals in equations. So, okay, so I've got a pretty good idea where people are at. Before you've even come to class, I've done no instruction live. We haven't met face-to-face. So here's how the class starts. Okay, class, welcome. I'm glad you've come to my physics class today. We're going to do our typical peer instructional process, and I have a pretty good idea of where everybody's at. So here's what I need you to do. I need you to get in groups of 2 or 3. Find some peers around you, and your job right now is to convince your peers that your answer is correct. You have 2 minutes. Go. Please do. Convince your peers that your answer is correct. You have 2 minutes. Okay, so we're going to cut this a little bit short just because we're running short on time. Okay, so I'm kind of curious. How many of you changed your answer based on that last interaction with your peers around you? You've been convinced by your peers that your answer was wrong and you've now changed your mind. A few of you. Good. Some of you, hopefully that happened because some of you had the wrong answer. So, okay, good. Okay, so let's do now a quick, I guess, kind of straw poll. How many of you think the answer is A? Good. Some of you put that earlier and have changed. How many of you think the answer is B? Okay. How many think the answer is C? How many think the answer is D? How about E? How about F? Okay, here's the good thing. Here's the good thing. B, C, and D, conceptually speaking, you understand the fact that that number is going to get smaller. Okay, that the force of attraction between them, because since they're further away, remember we're dividing by r squared, so we're dividing by the distance. If the distance gets bigger, that's in the denominator. If you have a bigger denominator, your value gets smaller. Okay, so that's good. So even if you forgot to square the term, double 2 squared is 4. So it should be C. Okay, so even if you forgot to square the term, and you still at least conceptually understood that it would get less. So that's good. And you are all able to convince each other that at least the value would go down. So now as a teacher, I have more, I have before the peer instruction data, I have after you've talked data. So this is now going to inform how I'm going to put you together in groups or how we're going to converse about this. Or there are obviously still some misconceptions out there, so let's talk about what we've learned about gravity, and that's going to generate conversation and discussion. Now, Dr. Mazur actually developed some software to help facilitate this process called Learning Catalytics. It's been subsequently purchased by Pearson, so it's probably going to cost 5 times more now than it was when he developed it, but hey, that's how the world works. But it's called Learning Catalytics, and it's really kind of cool because it's accessible on mobile devices, and you can, it kind of knows who has responded in what way, and it throws people together in these little ad hoc groups, tells you, look to the person on your left or to the person on your right, and that way you don't have a group where everybody already agrees. It kind of makes little groups where people have different answers, so it kind of helps automate some of those decision-making processes instead of kind of leaving it up to just stumbling upon hopefully someone who can teach you the right thing. It targets you. Okay, so it's a pretty cool product. But you can do the same process totally low tech if you want to do it that way. Oops, wrong direction. Let's do this with another question. Okay, so we're going to do this, and this, I love doing this in places where it's warm all the time. I did this in Singapore a couple months ago, and people looking at me like, what are you talking about? So, to go sledding on a snow tube, it would be best to inflate the snow tube when? So, this would obviously come after some sort of lesson about gas laws. Okay, so we're not going to watch a video on gas laws because we don't have time. But here's the idea of gas laws. Pressure, volume, and temperature influence each other. If you change the temperature, something happens to pressure. If you change the volume, something happens to temperature. Okay? Let's assume you had some instruction this way. Okay, so here we go. When's it best to fill up your tube? A, before leaving the warm house and going outside. B, after going outdoors where it's cold. Or C, it doesn't matter. Think for a second. Okay. Think for a minute. Okay, real quick. Low tech. We're not gonna use technology for this one. How many think it's A? It's best to fill it up before you leave the house. How many think it's B? It's best to fill it up after you go outside. How many of you think it's C? It doesn't matter. I can assure you from experience that it does, in fact, matter. Okay. So now at this point, you all agreed, and so I'm not even going to have you get into small groups because there's only one person here who doesn't know what he's talking about, and I know he grew up in Southern California and probably doesn't have a whole lot of sledding experience under his belt. So I broke my tailbone when I was 8 years old because my tube was not inflated well enough because I inflated it up before I went outside in the warm house where it was, 75 degrees, and I took it outside where it was 15 degrees below zero in the town in Wyoming where I grew up. And over the next 30 minutes or so, if you decrease the temperature, you decrease the volume. They are directly proportional. And the thing deflated, and I went off a little jump, much like this guy here, and wham, landed on my tailbone and was not able to sit down for 6 months. So it does matter, and so you want to fill it up with the cold air before you go outdoors because then there's no temperature change and there's no subsequent volume change. So again, I took the information that I just gathered really quickly. Pretty much everybody understood it and has some experience here. And we're not going to spend a lot of time going through the process, and we're going to move on. But I do know that I have some misconceptions, and there were a few of you who didn't participate, and so I need to go talk to you individually and figure out, do you understand it? Were you just not paying attention, or were you just embarrassed to respond? Because I had you do this. What's interesting, in case you can't tell, I'm a bit of an extrovert. My wife, extreme introvert. If you actually saw her last night, she was hiding in like the back row. She doesn't like to draw attention to herself. And the fact that I asked her a question in the middle of my presentation, she was mortified that I would actually do that. The interesting thing, and there's some interesting research about this too, that having this extra layer of not being face-to-face, some people actually find that a little bit empowering. And it typically are people who are more introverted, where people who would not normally respond or ask a question in a live class will often do so in an online environment. Or, I mean, there are even case studies where there are people who are, particularly women who live in very oppressive cultures, that would never ever interrupt a man or ask a direct question to a man, but are totally comfortable, and it's totally appropriate for them to interact in an online learning space cooperatively with people of both genders. So So there's some value there. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so that's the peer instructional model. A couple things about peer instruction there. Again, these are from Dr. Mazur. I've kind of adapted them to a flipped learning environment by using video as a teaching tool. Dr. Mazur does not always use video as a teaching tool. He might actually assign reading from the textbook. Yes, you can still do that. It's okay. Okay, so assign a reading, video, or something else to just front load with some information. Give them some background. Get some individual feedback from students and analyze the feedback all before class. Then, when you get to class, students are going to discuss with those that disagree, try to convince them that their answer is correct. That's what's called peer instruction, because peers are instructing each other, obviously. Then you're going to re-poll the students, figure out where the class is at, and then discuss those misconceptions. But as a teacher, you're not starting with, let me talk to you for a while. We're going to front load with some tools. We're going to use class time for you to teach each other first, and then I'm going to facilitate that process and intervene as necessary to meet the individual learning needs of people. So it might be that the class that gets it, the portion of the class that gets it, is going to go do something else, and I'm going to do a small little tutorial session over here. It's your class, you get to decide. Yes?
Would you please clarify earlier, after we broke up into the smaller groups and say we weren't getting the answer very well, you mentioned you would have us meet with other groups, you do another small group?
You could, if you wanted to. I would probably take the people who still had misconceptions and pull you off to the side and work with you individually and let the ones who get it move on and do something else. It might be a little bit difficult in a massive lecture hall, but finding the people who still need additional help, diagnosing who those individuals are and working directly with them. To be honest, as a practitioner, that was the most effective use of my class time, where giving the students the attention who need it. I mean, think about it. In a lecture-based class, even if you're asking for lots of questions and responses, the people who typically ask questions are the know-it-alls in the front row, right? Ooh, I have the answer, and I want more attention, and I want everyone to know how smart I am. But they are probably the people who are least likely to need your assistance and help, and you should probably be giving it to the people who are sitting in the back row who are too embarrassed to ask a question because they don't have a clue what's going on.
So those that don't need the help, what do you do with them? You go off and talk to those that need help. Give them a new challenge or a new problem to work on?
You can. In my own classroom, they had access to everything that they needed for that class, and it was their job to just move on to whatever the next assignment was. Be that they're doing some sort of practice problem or working on some other project that they're working on, or if they wanted to move on to the next lesson, they could do that as well. My class is pretty asynchronous, where people were doing different things at different times, and my attentions were focused on the students who needed the attention at that time. So, yeah.
Do you ever use peer tutoring in your classes? Like the students who get it, you say, hey, go find one of your friends who needs some help.
All the time, especially in larger classes where there's one of me and I have 35 students in my class. And you don't want 35 chemistry students in your class because people get hurt. So I did that all the time because I could only meet with a certain number of people. But yeah, or if I saw I just helped somebody or I knew that they got it and I saw someone struggling, I was like, I tell you what, go ask them. And to be honest, I didn't facilitate a lot of that. My students really helped each other, where they would, oh, you're stuck here. Let me help you. Let me teach you. One of the videos I didn't show you last night, there's a lot of examples of that, just students helping each other out, and they organized themselves. I didn't do it, but I would often stick them together with people that did. It's very helpful. Any other questions about peer instruction or anything else? Got about 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to move on to anything else. I was going to do some software demos. I think I'm just going to skip that. Just any of those software companies, they have tutorials on how to use some of their softwares. I would encourage you just to go find something and monkey around with it and learn how to use it. Yeah?
Could you talk a little bit about audience response, both either clickers or cell phone, and also maybe even another way of doing audience response is a collaborative document that people are editing real time?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of clickers because I think they're too expensive for what you're actually getting. If you came last night, we used Poll Everywhere. So Poll Everywhere is handy because you can access it through any mobile device or anything that connects to the internet, or even a mobile device you can text in your answer. I started using Poll Everywhere quite a few years ago, and there's free versions. There's paid versions. Just depends on how many users you want and what kind of data you want back, and if you want to customize these things. So I like Poll Everywhere a lot, just simply because anyone can access it pretty easily. And you can set it up to where, let me give you an example. At an advanced placement chemistry class that I taught, and I'd say 80% of my students had a cell phone in the class. 20% didn't. So everyone always asks me, well, you talk about all this technology, talk about using Pullover, what about the kids who don't have access? Well, the 80% that have it, they text in their answers, and then they hand their phone to the kid right next to them, and they text in their answers. And now you have another response. So you can set it up where multiple devices can submit multiple times. Pretty simple. So clickers are okay, and if you have a system that it works well, or even if you're at an institution where the expectation is that students will buy a clicker, we're all using whatever system and it just works anywhere on campus, that might work. If you're the only person in your department doing it, I would say find something where it's not device dependent, that they can use it on anything. I like solutions that you can, if you have the appropriate infrastructure where anybody can access it. That's just kind of, when I talk to schools and school districts, they say, what should I buy? I said, don't buy anything. Have them bring their own device and invest in bandwidth. I think that's a better investment. So the other thing you talked about with collaborative documents, I haven't actually done this, but I talked to a couple of professors who they have students take collaborative notes where okay, here's the class's Google Doc for the day. Everybody jump in and you can fill in and tweak and modify and enhance, or they will assign one person. You're the initial note taker for the day, and your assignment for the class is to go into that document and add to it and make it better. So those are some ways that I've seen that happen. You're kind of crowdsourcing the note taking process. Now, there's great value in actually sitting down and writing things on paper for note taking, and there's some cognitive research that says that it's actually better to write on paper than it is to type it. So I kind of like the idea of assigning one person to make the outline, then others can take their notes and fill it out and flesh it out, and then you have a kind of a document that everybody has. I know the crowdsourcing I find very fascinating because you can really fill in the gaps. Again, there's a whole vein in education that says, no, people need to do it themselves. That sounds like cheating. Sounds like working together like most people do when they have a job to me. But you phone a friend at work and you're getting helpful information to help you do your job better. Phone a friend at school and you're cheating. So I don't know, you decide. It just goes back to grades and competition and evaluation. I'm not a fan of ABCDF grading. I think it's wrong, to be perfectly honest. I wish it would just go away. The history of that is rather fascinating. It's a very American concoction, basically just to sort people and to automate some things. And I think it's rather dehumanizing, but that's just me. You can disagree with me. But you're wrong. Yes?
So, sorry, a different question.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to the gamification conversation earlier.
Sure.
So what we do is a lot of high production value education stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what's your thoughts on, what does that look like in terms of, because we have other stuff that doesn't allow the students to just be passive, but in terms of creating content that is engaging, because a lot of what we do is, discussion based, and we show the discussion, and then we're even having profiles of the students so the students online can get to know the students that they're watching in the classroom. Anyways, I'm just kind of curious what you think of entertainment, as a way to educate people and the passive.
Yeah, in general, I think making things as engaging as possible is always beneficial. I mean, if you're a boring lecturer and you record yourself, you now have a boring video. And who wants to subject themselves to that? So, yes, make it engaging, make it entertaining, but don't sacrifice on content because you want to make something flashy and exciting. So there's obviously, you have to keep that in some sort of a balance. But there's also and we didn't really get to this, but it's the create-curate question. Is it better to make your own stuff, or is it better to use material that's been made by somebody else? And that is a difficult question to answer, and I think the answer is probably a little bit of both. But so I've done some work with it's like high school / community college down in Monterrey, Mexico, and so my colleague and I went down there and did some work with them, teaching them just about this flipped classroom concept, and they said, "Oh, okay, so here's what we're going to do." It's because they had 15 campuses all over the region. We're going to take these 5 professors / instructional designers, And they're going to design the classes, and those 5 professors are going to create the video content for instruction. And then the 150 professors who teach that course are all going to use these materials for that course. And we actually advised them against that. We said, we think it's best if each professor makes their own content. Yes, we know it's a lot of additional work. They're like, no, we're going to try it. We're going to try it. So what they found is that the 5 professors who actually created the content, their students were immensely successful with this model, by using video as a teaching tool and then just recuperating class time. The rest, the other 145, didn't work because the students are like, why would I want to watch this professor when you're my professor? Why aren't you teaching me the stuff? So, oh, it's Levi. Hey, buddy.
Thank you for the keys.
Thanks.
You guys learn a lot.
So they've then brought us back to train the rest of their staff on how to create their own content and to do it well. Because then they're actually researching this now, and they're finding that it was in fact better for the individual professors to make their own stuff, and the students were more likely to be engaged in it. The production quality went down, but the student engagement went up. I mean, how many of you, when you teach a lesson live in a class, do it perfect from a script? It's messy, it's gooey, it's organic, it's natural, it's people are squishy, inside and out, in all parts of us. I don't know, things that are too polished, I think can be a little, I don't know, is contrived the right word? I don't want that to be derogatory. It can feel, sometimes I think can feel a little forced in a learning environment. But there's a place for really good, high-quality stuff if it's effective, and it is entertaining and fun and engaging. So I always tried to make mine a little bit humorous, and some of my students loved the dumb jokes, and some of the students were like, seriously? So I always put it in the front of my lessons. So the first minute to a minute and a half, they knew was just like worthless. It was just me telling stupid jokes, right? And some students really enjoyed it. And they, hey, Miss Sam, that was a pretty nice joke. Other students knew, scrub through first minute and a half. When the first slide pops up, that's when I start. But that's the wonderful thing about having the power over the slider and the pause button and the fast forward button is you can control that if it's not working for you. So, I don't know. I like the idea of high quality stuff. I don't have the skills or the time to produce it. So mine is usually good enough. Sorry, that was kind of a rambling rant of a question or answer to your question. Anything else in our last minute?
But you could use a mix, right? You could have your content there, but then point them to other things.
Yep, definitely. And I do know some teachers that's exactly what they do. They will actually set up a video, say, okay, here's a video that I found from so-and-so, and here's a couple things I want you to look for, go. And that's kind of cool. Others are actually mashing them together in another video. They're probably violating all sorts of copyright laws to do that, but be careful.
Is there any research that shows what happens if instead of doing the Civil War, you just send people to watch Ken Burns and then discuss it?
Not that I know of. I would be reluctant. I mean, how many of us had the history teacher who just showed the history videos in class every day, right? Because that was easy and we just all watched other people's stuff. So I don't know. Actually, at some point when my life slows down, I actually want to research that. Is it better to use your own stuff or somebody else's? It's a burning question that I have. Is it better to go watch the Ken Burns or high production value video and then using that, or is it better to have teacher-produced content? To be honest, it's probably better to read primary documents from the Civil War and discuss those than it is to use somebody else's distilled version of that.
I think that's probably right.
Yeah. But as a teacher, I can, and especially in a humanities side of things, a lot of social studies teachers, history teachers, they kind of look at this concept and they go, okay, I'm going to use that very sparingly. I'm not going to use that for every lesson. Whereas like in math and science, I think it really lends itself to just kind of chunk. A lot of history teachers I know, they'll do like a unit overview. A little bit of a, kind of life and times background, and then class is time for primary documents and discussion. I'm not going to do this for every single lesson. I'm going to do a unit overview.
What about incorporating narrative? Because I think that's a lot of what our focus is, having narrative be a part of it. So if you watch a film that talks about a story based in the Civil War, then you have a narrative of an understanding, you get the history content, and then you look at the documents. And so
Yeah.
Yeah, having narrative helps the students along as well.
Yeah, and the job of the instructor there is to really provide the context for how it all fits together for those particular learners. Good. Well, we are 2 minutes over. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your time, your questions, and stimulating conversation, and I probably, hopefully, learned as much as you did. So, thanks a lot.